Welcome, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Adam Cross. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Southern California, and today I'm here with Kolbe Young and Joshua Hernandez, and we're in kind of our new recording setup here, which is pretty exciting, getting us in person because we live so far from each other, right? Like maybe not even 10 minutes.
It took us a day to finally get here.
But we're here. We're excited. But yeah, before we jump in, any other intros, anything you want to share with?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. My name is Joshua, and I'm just a up and coming therapist at the Catholic Therapy Center. So I'm excited to, start my journey with you all, and really just serve the community around here. Nice.
And I'm Kolbe. I'm actively serving at the Catholic Therapy Center, specializing in holistic trauma treatment, but also treating all sorts of disorders there. So, yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So today we were going to really jump into the bright topic of suffering from a Catholic perspective, but I don't know, any initial thoughts as we're jumping into that and joy?
I feel like it's definitely a heavy topic. Like we could get really existential real quick.
Yeah.
But also, I'm curious how we could keep it lighthearted.
Yeah.
Maybe balance out.
Yeah.
As we're helping our audience and even ourselves kind of regulate through these really deep trenches, through kind of the darkest moments that we go through in our lives. We see our clients go through. I know I can think back on multiple instances right now where I've been kind of really wrestling with, or I've been walking with some clients wrestling with these deep questions.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what comes up for me.
It's such a big part of therapy, is that we are kind of surrounded by suffering every day. People don't come to us when life is really great.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're around, we feel in so many ways, that's just kind of part of the field, and it can weigh on us. And I think that's probably the biggest question I get. I don't know about you guys, but it's people asking me like, how do you listen to so much hard stuff day in and day out, and what's that like? And I don't know if you guys have really come across that or really felt that.
I feel that it's a balancing act. If we're not doing our own work, then we're constantly having our own trauma and wounds activated whenever a client's talking about theirs. And so obviously allowing ourselves to be moved by our clients, but if we're getting so moved that we're in our own trauma response and not holding space for our clients, then of course that's not going to be sustainable for us to do day in and day out. I mean, we talk about in our field all the time how we have to maintain the self-care plan, and we have to have balance and receive and find ways to fill ourselves up. I know taking some time after a heavy day of sessions, just like 20 minutes to decompress, maybe move my body in some way, get some sunshine or get outside, often helps.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, right? We gotta be able to be good at recognizing our own red flags whenever we're approaching burnout and we see the cliff coming. Right? We don't want to get to it. We don't want to go over the cliff, but it's good to have road markers that you recognize, I've been more tired lately, or whatever it may be for you personally. But it's good to be conscious of those things.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you're not paying attention to those things and you're losing control, then there's no holding space. There's no really helping anyone, right? So I think that's key. But I think for me, when I think of why is there suffering right in the world, is it? For me personally, I always go back to freedom. You can't have freedom without the potential to have suffering. And so I think for me, it always ties into free will and the limited volition that we have as humans is that God appreciates that so much. That is such a key thing of his relationality, is the ability to choose him. But with that freedom, does come like the dangers, right? And I think that's you can't have either or. You have to have both.
I think, and I forget if I mentioned it with you guys, but yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's kind of the face of modern day, science and maybe scientism to a degree. But I remember someone asked him in an interview, "Why don't you believe in God?" And his response wasn't, "Well, there's no data, and or the data shows otherwise." It was his response was just, "Well, look at the world. There's so much suffering. There's so much evil. How could a good God exist in the face of all that?" And I was like, wow, Neil deGrasse Tyson, this face of science in our modern era is giving an emotional reason.
Yeah, such a human response.
Yeah, this problem of suffering that is so such a philosophical, like you're saying, Josh, like question of how does a good God exist? And the answer is like, well, he respects our free will. And going back to the garden, it's he gave us that free will, that choice, and as the knight in Indiana Jones would say, "You chose poorly." Right?
Yeah.
It's so sin enters the picture, and we have all of evil, natural evil, suffering, disease, death, right? Pain, all these things. But I think I notice it most in myself with my clients when, like, if I'm carrying a lot of the burden of suffering, or even just kind of like a pessimism, I notice that I start just getting really tired even going into sessions. Like, that's my biggest cue, is I'm just like, oh, I'm so tired. And usually I need to like check in with myself and, take things to prayer, or kind of operate with some self-care, some more intentional self-care in some way. But it can be heavy, like unchecked. And I think that's why, especially as Catholic therapists, it's so big that we can invite God into these huge questions, because otherwise, man, is it hopeless? It's scary.
Yeah.
If there's no, talking about suffering, I mean, jump into the resurrection. If there's no resurrection, it's like, oh man, why are we doing this? Why are we going through this? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
So I wrestle with trying to even carry suffering if there was no point, right? There's no resurrection. That's I don't know how people do it. I don't.
Yeah. It's such a resiliency factor for faith-based people and our fellow Catholics, that if they can really rally around that idea of there is a resurrection and this isn't all there is.
Yeah.
But even that can be, there can be some hopelessness in there, or just some resignation to, while we're on this side of eternity, this is all that there is. Okay, we want to hold that as the Catholic therapists, the tension of there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of overwhelm for you right now, but we know, as walking our own personal journeys, that there's another side to kind of being in the trenches and carrying our burdens and our trauma in a very heavy way. And what does it mean to carry them lightly with the yoke of the Lord? And that really doesn't come until you get hindsight. Once you've kind of passed through a few crests in your growth journey, your development to holiness and flourishing. And I find that the further I walk, the more internal resiliency I have for myself and for others, because I know, okay, that this isn't all there is for them even now. They just need to get through this hard stage or transition. Or if they could just relate to themselves better, or if they could finally make this next step in their life, or make this change in their life, gosh, their life would be so much different. And we see that because we see clients. We have the data of clients who have done that. But then yet again, as you were saying, there's always free will. And so the people we work with may or may not choose to follow along in that.
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, like there's two extremes, right? And you guys can correct me if that might be going out too far on a limb here, but it's almost like it's a horseshoe, right? Whether you're like completely atheist and like have no sense of God and redemption and everything. Yeah, there's only suffering and it's unjust and there's no redemptive aspect to the suffering. It's just, it is what it is. You kind of have to like move with it, right? The other side of that coin, like you said, the other pitfall that we could fall into as a people of faith is, well, in this side of the, this side of life, not heaven, not perfection, there's only suffering, and suffering is what I must do and everything. So it's almost like a learned helplessness where you end up on both extremes. You end up at the same horseshoe at the same exact end, right? And that's the thing, is like part of that is the learned helplessness, as you said. I was just like, okay, if all there is suffering and I have to like just put up with it because I get offered this up, right?
Yeah.
But not really change. Let's say the fact is that we are in control. So there's the outside factor that maybe is outside of our locus of control. But then, okay, maybe we could change our environment. Maybe we can change our way that we communicate things. Maybe, the things that we're consuming, we might be able to like pivot and shift that a little bit, right? And so there's little things that you could always do that are there, accessible to. For example, lessen that suffering and, like you said, be able to like live more of a fuller life, even though it's an imperfect world.
And that's a good point. There's like two ends of the spectrum where if you're a materialist and you just think there's no point to life, I mean, you can really enter into that nihilism, the hedonism of just like, well, suck all the pleasure out of life you can because there's no point, avoid suffering. And if you're stuck in that suffering, end your life. Right. And that's why a lot of these laws that are newer, promoting, death with dignity. And I think Canada is even close to legalizing if someone is clinically depressed and wants to end their life, that's going to be allowed, which is going to change the game for therapists. Because now we're going from mandated reporters for suicidality to affirming that. Right. But the other end of that spectrum can be a distorted kind of view of even Catholicism, where, and I, working with a lot of individuals struggling with scrupulosity, I see this, or you might see it in your parish, right, where you see certain individuals are like, no, we need to suffer more. And I think that's really worth emphasizing is God does not want us to suffer. Like Adam and Eve in the garden, suffering was not part of the plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we can sometimes mistake the good that God brings out of suffering, right? The fruit that is born out of the manure used in the garden. Sometimes we can mistake the manure for the fruit, right? And think, no, I'm made for the manure, right? I'm made for the suffering. It's like, no, that was never the intent. But God is going to use even that to bring about glory and healing.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be careful not to confuse the two, right? We don't relish in the suffering. Like, yes, bring it on. There may be times where we are grateful for suffering because we know how God is going to use it. And we know that God is working through it. But that's still not the same thing as like saying suffering is good in itself, right? No, God is good. And I think that's something that I really want to emphasize for people is just like, so the suffering itself is not the plan, right? What God does with it is the plan. That's where the hope is. But I think we can really get lost in that sometimes with scrupulosity maybe, or just a distorted view, because we're not supposed to be whipping ourselves and we have, and I think I think it's important to even approach trying to take on more suffering with a lot of discernment and a spiritual director, because sometimes people say, I want to take on suffering for others. And so we want to do that with some guidance, probably not, or just on our own,
Because, like you said, suffering and pain, right? That doesn't correlate with holiness. Like the more we're able to withstand, the more we're able to like if the pain increases, my holiness increases. Like the participation of you or cooperation with God, that's the goodness. Goodness can come out of this pile of, manure, like you said. But it's not the amount of manure that matters. It's really what you do with it, and God, and with God's help, and with the intentionality. If the intention is just to like increase suffering, to increase holiness, we're looking at this wrong.
And it's actually disordered if we can't appreciate the pleasure of things, right? Like if sometimes we're so focused on suffering and there's a scrupulousness that if pleasure comes around, we can feel guilty. It's like, I shouldn't enjoy this. This shouldn't be great. Like I should humble myself, and I should. It's like, well, if we're doing that, because we want to stay in that suffering, we also have to consider that heaven is going to be pure pleasure, right? And so, how willing are we to receive the goodness of God, right? And that means within suffering too. It's not kind of all or nothing. I mean, there's a pleasure, there's a peace even within our suffering that we're called to have. But do we feel guilty if we're in a good place, right? Or if things are great in life? How do we navigate that? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on
like how do we navigate when there might be guilt showing up for feeling anything good? What came to mind as you were talking was, maybe for some people this resonates, for some of our listeners, but what I've seen sometimes is there may be this part of someone that feels guilty for feeling something good out of alliance or loyalty to family or to a culture or to a personal experience, maybe past trauma. If I feel good about something, then I'm denying everything that's happened in my family, or I'm contradicting the story of my people, or I'm going against the experience I had. I'm invalidating it in some way, and that could be very subconscious. As just, I'm not going to feel anything good because that's probably often a part that is just wanting to have its story heard, a wounded part. So we're carrying our burdens really heavily. And so not only is there an incapacity to feel much pleasure or anything good, but there's almost an unwillingness to, because to do so would be somehow invalidating the part that just needs to have its story heard, and the trauma story, the wounded, the wound lifted in a sense.
Because we can repress positive emotions and positive things too. It's not just the negative. And so pushing parts of us down that carry good things, that has a way of coming up. if we ignore that, neglect that, those parts might pop up in other ways. And
I feel like you have some insight on that. How might it pop up in other ways?
Addiction.
Yep. That's what I was thinking.
It's a big one.
A lot of addictions.
Surprise people. Just
and people don't see the correlation at face value. That's very that could be an aha moment for many of our listeners or for clients we're working with.
That even if we're repressing something good, it could pop up in a bad way, right? And I think, I mean, the biggest example that comes to my mind with that would just be like a healthy longing for intimacy, to be seen, right? And then for that to be manifesting with pornography addiction, right? It's a unmet need that is being ignored, right? Maybe someone doesn't think they're good enough to be seen fully, to be accepted, to be loved. And so they push that down. They might even shame it, criticize it. And then it comes up in this almost like a forceful way, right, is,
Yeah.
porn use is very impulsive usually, and it's a matter of almost like a moment of weakness, but it could feel like a moment of liberation for people. And it's
the rebellious side.
Yeah,
It's I have a voice too. Hello, I'm here. Yeah.
And it's rebelling
Yeah.
because and again, sin is sin, right? And porn use, masturbation is a disordered act. And at the same time, we can understand that there could be a need, a desire that God has put on our hearts that is being pushed down, and it's being pushed down so much, maybe for so long or repeatedly, that kind of like a volcano that pressurized, and now it explodes, right? And so now it's, again, this rebellious act. This part kind of rushes to the surface and says, I need this now, at any cost, and throws away our sense of morality and virtue, and then we're kind of left like, what happened, right? And that's so
often
common with
it's
addiction.
Sorry to cut you off,
go for it.
but I'm just thinking, I'm getting the image of a child who's before the age of reason and just grasping out for a need there. And just to bring it back to often distinguishing the person from the behavior, or the person from the act. And this part of the person is good, inherently good, and desiring something good. You mentioned this intimacy, and is acting out in, let's say, a sinful or an unhelpful or an unhealthy way, and could be with many different things. But inherently underneath, there's a good desire, there's a good part there. And so what we're doing often in therapy is giving a platform for that part to speak, modulating that relationship with the client and that part of the client, and then helping that part come into more balance, maybe giving a new role
Good.
that isn't as extreme. But this part really values intimacy. Okay, so how could we meet that need in other less extreme ways, let's say virtuous ways?
And so much of, and I see this with a lot of clients and with myself, honestly, with my own therapy work, but a lot of our suffering in childhood, we can't cognitively process it like we can we can when we're adults. And so part of that, and we're talking a lot about parts work here today, and part of internal family systems, and Litanies of the Heart is a great place to start, or Souls and Hearts, Dr. Jared Crete, Dr. Peter Malinowski, quick shout out. But yeah, so these parts of us can't really cognitively process the suffering that they go through. And I have some experiences of that, even kind of starting preschool. I don't know if I've shared this with you guys, but I remember when I first started preschool, my mom dropped me off at preschool. My grandma lived with us, so she helped raise me. And I just remember, I just want to be home with my grandma. I want to watch soap operas with her like we normally would. I didn't want to be there. And so I go to preschool. I'm, anxious, didn't want to be there. But then I make it through the day and I'm like, I did it, and everyone's getting picked up. And then I'm watching all these other moms and parents come, and I'm just waiting for my mom, and I don't see her. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And then at some point, somebody tells me like, you're staying in after school care, right? And because my mom she's a nurse, staying in after school care. But I just remember thinking, well, how come all the other kids got picked up, right? Like, what did I do wrong that, like, my mom wasn't here? When at the end of the day. And I think when I was like 3 or 4 in preschool, after school care felt like eternity. So I was like, what is going on? Right. So I internalized that, like, why isn't my mom here? And part of my own therapy work and healing work has really been giving a lot of love and care, kind of me scooping up that 4-year-old who went through suffering, even though my parents did nothing wrong. My mom's working, she's a nurse, no malintent, but my 4-year-old brain was like, I'm not wanted, or I'm not loved. So my therapy work has been scooping up that kid and like holding him and taking him with me and caring for him in a very, paternal and personal way. But helping him make sense of that suffering, because that, again, my parents weren't intending anything wrong, but that's something I came to conclude at 4, and so I think a lot of healing work with suffering can be helping those inner children, who experience something, make sense of it, and to invite Christ into that and say, no, like you're a beloved son. Like like I'm well pleased with you. Like your mom loved you. Like, and I was there with you at preschool. And I, so that is where I think real transformation happens. But it's vulnerable. It's hard to do. Hard to do alone.
That's where the rubber really hits the road, and we have this meeting place within the tension of suffering and beatitude. And where grace really can intervene, and where maybe we're doing all the right things, we're praying all the prayers, we're doing all the Catholic or Christian things, but when we're able to really slow it down and have these different sides of our mind or these different memories meet in presence with the Lord, wow, that's a very different mode of being. And wow, that's exciting. That's like the juicy stuff in our work.
Man. I'm listening to Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. I've never listened to it before. It's been recommended to me for years, but going through the audiobook, and he said today, part of that book, he was saying that God kind of waits till it feels impossible to come back to then act. And he's like, he's really saying God is using suffering also to bring us to him, to show us how much we need him and how we're dependent on him. And it's just that, I mean, the imagery of like Christ dying, right? He's in the tomb, he's dead, it's final. That's when he acts, right? Or, even thinking like Abraham and Isaac, it's Isaac is carrying the wood up the mountain with Abraham, and, he's ready to sacrifice. Like Isaac is a willful sacrifice, and then God at the last second, Abraham's ready to sacrifice his son. God provides the alternative, and so through scripture, there's all these moments of like, okay, we're too far gone, right? Even in our suffering, like we're too far gone. And then that's where God comes in. And so there's something really beautiful about even remembering that God is working in the suffering. It's never too late. It's never too far gone. And he's asking us for that faith. And that's painful. That could be painful. Like from personal experience, it's like, what are you doing? And why, why not act now? Right. But trusting in that greater plan.
It's so hard, but it's doable when we're accompanied with other people, I think. When we're able to co-regulate our nervous systems with one another, I think that bedrock of stability makes it worthwhile and makes it possible. We're able to pace ourselves through that, because otherwise the patience, the waiting, the slow process feels too dysregulating, too chaotic. That's what we're offering so often in therapy, but then that's what we're encouraging our clients to go seek out in their support networks, and what we've been for each other as brothers, as friends, as colleagues.
That might be an understatement too, right? It's having that community vulnerability, that support. I mean, that makes or breaks a crisis, right? Like you're saying, that co-regulating, that makes such a difference. Man. I think I've shared this. I know I've shared it at retreats that I've done with Michael Gasparo, but there's that image of what looks like a 14-year-old boy from the Holocaust, I think in Auschwitz, and so I remember seeing that image, and I was scrolling on Instagram, saw this image pop up, and it looks 14-year-old boy, striped, uniform, and then eyes are watery, kind of there's some bruising. And I remember looking at the description and seeing that it's actually a 14-year-old girl. She was taken to Auschwitz. She's Polish, Catholic, and I think her family had died in the concentration camp, and this image that this picture they took of her, they had just beaten her, and then they stuck her in front of a camera, took her picture. It looks like she's holding back tears, and then I was reading that description, and right after they take that picture, they inject her with poison and kill her right there. And I remember reading that right after my oldest daughter was born. I think it was like Ellie was born in December, and I think I was reading this in like January. And I just remember like it was like 10 p.m. I'm sitting on my couch at home, just like crying over Instagram, just like really struggling with this question of, okay, why, God? How could you let this happen to a 14-year-old girl? She didn't even speak German. She didn't speak the language. People are doing this to her, killed her family. They kill her. It's like, that's hell. Like, that just sounds like hell. And then especially as a dad, like a new dad, I was like, what the heck? Like, what is going on? But that really, as a father, that really made me kind of wrestle with this question of suffering with God. And I did feel like I had some options. I was like, I could either say like, this is bogus plan. Like, this life sucks. like screw this. like is it, and I really had those questions. Like, is this really the best option? Right. But I remember I decided I was going to bring it to God, because I was angry. I was like, what the heck? I'm a father. And like, I can't protect my daughter. Like, in reality, like, I can't protect her from suffering. And so I remember like really taking those questions of prayer with the Lord and just saying like, okay, God, why? Like, is this the best suffering? I know the theological answer. I know the philosophical answer, but as a new father, as a person, as a therapist working with people who are suffering, like, why is this what we have? And I really did. It wasn't like an immediate answer of like relief, like, oh, okay, it's fine. It's like, no, this suffering is still really real. But I do remember in the conversations and prayer feeling like there was a slow, like a softening of my heart in God kind of speaking that reminder of, yeah, this is terrible, but I'm going to make all things right. I'm going to make all things new. Like this image of like a dam breaking, like water just coming through and like clearing everything, and just like, so, but that takes faith. But I think for me, it was really just having those honest conversations with God that really helped, and like not being afraid to get angry with God, like, why aren't you helping this person? Or why aren't you healing this family member? Or why do we have to do this? But it's not easy. But I guess what I'm saying is maybe the relationship really makes like a huge difference. Is hold on to that relationship, and kind of wait and see what the Lord's doing in the suffering. But it's an act of trust. It's an act of faith. And, but have you guys seen that in your work or studies? Just like that need to hold on. How do you encourage people to hold on amidst the suffering? Because it's real suffering.
It is.
It's not. Yeah. So how do you encourage people to?
I'm gonna be honest. I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out, because, right, and kind of referencing maybe some of the other podcasts that we have done, right, going back to attachments, depending on the attachment style that you created with your caregivers, with your parents originally, right? Somebody might not make that choice. They might not necessarily go and talk to God and say like, I'm angry. They might just avoid it altogether and say like, I'm just writing God off. Like, this plan, like you said, this plan sucks. Yeah. And I mean, I think any day we can find an example of like why this creation plan was just not the best. Right. But if we just take that for face value and our own responses to like be anxious avoidance, and just then therefore avoid God, then yeah, we just hold on to that anger, and and partially I'm speaking from experience where sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to talk to God, but I'm kind of angry, but I'm not allowed to be angry, right? Because of upbringing or cultural values or, whatever you want to plug in.
Yeah.
But I think when it always, at least in the most basic foundational thing, when it comes to like allowing our clients or my clients specifically to keep walking forward and to kind of keep on this journey, even though it seems like hopeless, right? Is kind of normalizing this suffering and kind of normalizing the aspect of like, in our human nature, in life in general, things are gonna happen. No one gets out of this life unscathed, right? We're all gonna die. We're all gonna get some bruises, get some broken bones, and just kind of normalizing it to them and making sure that they don't feel like, wow, this is only happening to me.
Yeah.
Like I'm the only one in the world out of like 7 billion people that is like suffering this bad, right? And because that might be more, that perception is way more overwhelming than saying, 330 million people in the US are living here and they're all suffering in some way, somehow. Like, so that again kind of attaches you to like, I'm suffering. Maybe my community is suffering. Maybe as a general population, we're all have our own struggles, right? So it kind of takes some of the steam off, I think, in general. Where it's just like, okay, if other people can do it, I can do it too. Like I'm connected to the human aspect, to the human experience. And I think for me that has been key. Just because I think in my personal work with some clients, right? They might not have a Catholic foundation. They might not have a faith background. So then integrating the Catholic Christian framework, right? Underlying my words and everything is just about normalizing the experience and kind of really tying back to, okay, the human experience of all of us. You're connecting them to something as opposed to feeling like they're alone in an island of just suffering.
They're not alone. It's not just a them problem.
I
feel like I find myself telling people that a lot. Like, like what you're experiencing, it's not just that's not just Adam, it's like, no, like you're not alone. This is a human problem. This is a human experience. That's huge. Like normalizing it.
And some clients are receptive to hear that. Some aren't ready yet. But somehow normalizing it can be so therapeutic. I find offering some way to make the suffering meaningful helps them push through it. Providing coping strategies, getting real practical there, like helping someone really find ways to pace themselves and self-regulate, co-regulate, finding ways to widen their window of tolerance. So their stress tolerance, if it's really narrow because of a lot of relational or complex trauma, so they're easily activated into a fight, flight, fawn or freeze response, then helping them widen that through daily practices to down-regulate themselves from a hyper-aroused state that's anxious, racing thoughts, hyper-controlling, or upregulating them out of a freeze, shut down, numbed out response.
If someone's really suffering and in crisis, it's like going to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Can I breathe? Can I eat? Can I sleep? Can I talk to somebody? Kind of moving up that ladder. But I mean, that's great. Like the practicals, like it's essentially, can I be human? Right? Can I be present? Can I slow down, or get sun, go for a walk? But that's huge.
And giving them that spiritual nourishment too. So whether it's a scripture or, of course, if there's a lot of anger there, then maybe they're not going to be too receptive to that right now, but so maybe giving a platform for that anger to vent and reassuring someone that it's okay to feel angry or whatever that is around
all
God
of it
for allowing this. Because often not allowing ourselves to feel that then becomes one of the biggest obstacles in our path to moving through this suffering with the most lightness and ease as possible.
And permission to have good days and bad days. To, you know, again, going back to the guilt, it's like you could be in a real suffering and have a good day and laugh. And that's okay. You know, and so permission for all of that to be there. And it can be a roller coaster. It's not, it's one day at a time. It's not a steady, you know, linear path. Stages of grief are not, okay, I've moved to this step. You know, it's all over the place. And so letting people know that there can be triggers that come up and all of a sudden we're really not okay. And then, and then we're okay. Right. And then another trigger might come up and we're less distressed, but we're still not okay. You know, and so that patience with self in the midst of suffering, I think is really big.
Another thing I'm thinking of, if I could mention, as we're on the topic of how to support our clients and support ourselves walk through suffering. Getting in touch with maybe old hobbies or things that we love to do as a teenager, because at that young age, there's kind of a purity there and a naivety to maybe an interest or a passion we had. And so maybe we've totally forgotten as we've become disillusioned, suffering in the trenches, young adults or wherever our audience is in their lifespan. And we've kind of forgotten those things that lit a fire under us as kids or as young teens.
Respark a flame.
Resparking something. So whether it's music or picking up an old instrument or
skydiving.
Skydiving. We were talking about that last week. Something just to bring in some fun. Or there are a lot of studies done on how having a sense of humor can be such a resiliency factor and just persevering through suffering. Providing someone that courage, that grit.
That's huge. So. It's just that reminder that we are uniting our wounds with the wounds of Christ in suffering. And so there is that extreme purpose, like we're sharing in the passion and I think it's beautiful. You know, there's no other religion besides Christianity where God comes down into that human experience, and to think about that God could have redeemed us in probably a lot of different ways, but chose this. And, you know, God could have kind of hovered above our suffering and said, oh yeah, that's rough and I'm here. Right. But that Jesus enters into suffering, you know, and shares in that, you know, with us that's a huge mystery, like how personal, how intimate. And I find that in hard things that I've been through in my life, I have found a real beauty where like I'm really suffering and I turn to God and I'm like, God, what the heck? And then I see him right there and he's like, yep, I'm here. And not just like, I'm here next to you, this is hard. He's like, I understand. Like I've entered into that, you know, and like, so that's been huge for me. It's just like when I'm really suffering and kind of, so to speak, like I'm looking around and I look around and I just see Jesus right there. And I'm like, oh, you've been here. You've been here longer than me. You went through this worse than me, but you're here, you know, and you entered into it for me. You know, that's been really powerful for me. It's just that Jesus is there and like very intentional, very personally entered into suffering for you, you know, as you're suffering, whatever that might be.
In a mystical way, being present for every wound that has been inflicted on us. And what a tender place when we can actually revisit those traumatic memories
Yeah.
and not only hold the pain, but see that there's someone else there.
Mm-hmm.
And that someone else is the creator of the universe, the one who created you.
Yeah.
And is there not changing anything, but there's suffering with you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's deep.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's a beauty to it too.
Mm-hmm.
That I think you can recognize in the right time and place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This idea that God is like, God's outside of space and time. And so he sees all evil and all suffering. He sees your whole life at once. And he's not scandalized by it. He's never hopeless. He's not depressed by it. He just, like, the idea that God approaches our suffering with a reverence, you know, and like a plan for beauty, that gives me chills, you know?
Yeah.
And again, it's not that he wants it. He doesn't want that suffering for us, but he's there suffering with us, and he's going to act. You know, he's going to beyond beauty, beyond belief, you know, meaning beyond belief. Yeah, I think that's something to hold on to. It's like God is not scandalized by our suffering or our mistakes, you know, and he's willing to work through that, you know. And so I think that's hope, right? Is God is working, you know, even if we don't see the end. And I think that's usually how it feels in the midst of really extreme suffering is we're like, God, I don't get it. I don't see the purpose, the end goal here.
Right.
But can I lean into that relationship?
I think that's key, right? The permission to be human, and to be like fully human and experience all the emotions and everything, right? Because so often we want to be perfect, or we want to like earn, you know, if God's perfect, we gotta be perfect, type of thing. But just allowing our humanity to really be expressed, and to, like you said, invite kind of God in. I almost get this picture of like, you know, almost like if I were to like be a waiter and I dropped a bunch of food, right, and now I'm like messy and dirty, and my boss shows up, and I'm like looking up, like, please don't look at me, like I messed up, like, you know, like I'm covered in everything, God knows what, like, right? And instead of like judging, criticizing, or anything, they just roll up their sleeves and they like go down on their knees and like clean up the mess with me, right? It's not about fixing the issue or removing me out of them, but it's really of just like getting their hands dirty and like being hands-on with you. And to be vulnerable, right? To like let ourselves be helped, to be human, to like experience that with them. Because that shame could really quickly run into like, no, don't touch this. Don't touch this. Right? But instead is it's just like, okay, maybe I'm gonna cry, maybe I'm gonna feel ashamed. But let God in and help you pick up the broken pieces, pick up whatever it is.
Your shame and your suffering is the means for your healing.
Yes.
It's not something to get around or get over. That is the means. And I mean, I comes up with clients all the time. It's like, oof, this part of you that is really just struggling, that you wish wasn't there. Like God's saying, I want that. Let me into that. Like, I want to love that part, you know? And so it's like, get dirty. It's not like, and that's hard. Like, get messy. But that's where God wants to go.
And allowing God to get messy, right?
Yeah.
We almost want to keep going, like, you can't enter here. This is unholy ground. You know,
we can't tame him. You come in when I want you to come in. Don't come into this. It's like,
what a reflection of how parts are polarized within the self system. If we don't want God coming in and looking at a part, how ostracized that part must feel from the rest of that person.
And how we can oppress ourselves and oppress other parts of us, trying to be God. There's a part of us that says, I have to take over, I have to protect, I don't think God's here, I'm going to survive, and all these other parts of us are pushed away, repressed. And then when we try to heal, it's like that part is like, well, I can't give up control. We can't trust God. That's terrifying. What if God doesn't come through? Right. So that suffering it can be a block to suffering that is even self-protection, right? Or block to healing suffering that is self-protection. Yeah. That's hard. That's hard. And part of that is recognizing, we protect ourselves. We've learned to survive. That's good. You know, we can affirm that, and we can let God in, right? And we can, we can open a door, right? I don't know if it was Fulton Sheen that said, sometimes the only way the good Lord can get into a heart is by breaking it, or something like that. I'm probably
might have been him.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds good.
Yeah. So sometimes we kind of protect ourselves from the suffering we've experienced by putting up these walls. And so God will let those walls crumble, or he will let a battering ram hit it. He will permit it, right? So that now he has an opening. Because otherwise we can feel like, no, I'm self-sufficient, and sometimes that can really be the biggest obstacle to even holiness.
Yeah.
Self-sufficiency.
And then just really landing what you were saying there with that our suffering becomes the means of our salvation.
Yeah.
We hear that in scripture and how that's the salvation story, but how that becomes so personal and embodied within our own story, within our own families, that the wounds within my family's generations has become not just something that I have to get over or heal from, or purify myself from. No, that's actually something that's my means for beatitude, for salvation.
Yeah.
And then even taking it a step further, as a father of my daughter, I know I'm not perfect, and I know as a therapist, I have the awareness that I'm going to mess up, and I'm going to, there are going to be things, there are going to be repercussions in my daughter's life.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Yeah. Thank God, because that's going to be her path to salvation. Not a cop-out from taking responsibility to do my best, but surrendering to the fact that I did my best, and I'm leaving the rest to the Lord to offer those places of wounding as places of tenderness and connection.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. There's the paradox of the cross, right? The serpent raised up in the desert in Exodus, right? And now heals the wounds. This bloody crucifixion is now the door to our salvation. And so I think that's a good challenge for probably all of us, is what is that area in our life that we're trying to maybe even heal away, right? If I could just get rid of this, if I could just get over this, get through this, if I could just hide this, not have to deal with this, then life would be easier. But how is God actually using that as the key to healing and sanctification? Right? To not run away from it, but to enter deeper into that wound, to heal it, and that's a mystery, and it's different for everybody, but that's something for me to even contemplate more. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, ooh.
Such a powerful, truth. We can never hear that enough.
Man.
Kind of to reflect what you just said is, and going back to the beginning of this podcast, right, is, again, it's not about focusing and hyper-focusing on the suffering or the action of suffering, but really about the question of, what is this telling me? What is this addiction revealing about myself? What is this habit of people pleasing? What is this habit of being ashamed of me? Or whatever it may be, fill in your blank, right? What is this telling me about myself? Like, where in that is God calling me to go and trust? Right? Again, it's not about the suffering itself. It's about the invitation to go somewhere new, to reveal something deeper about yourself, your humanity, right? Very relational, cognitive, body and soul unity. What is, I think the question that, listeners and ourselves really have to ask ourselves is, what is this telling me? Like, what is this seeking to reveal
Yeah.
Because the underlying need is what the key to healing and redemption is, right? Is not the action of like, if I could look this way or if I could remove this part,
Yeah. Or even if I could just get over it.
Yeah. Or this
That
suffering is
healing.
gonna be my salvation, right?
Yeah.
Not the suffering itself. Don't hear that. It's what is it? What is the underlying purpose for them? What is the key thing that it's revealing, right?
Yeah, I'm hearing you say like we can't be too attached to our suffering. Like, this is my cross, and this will be my cross till I die. It's like, well, what if God wants to heal it?
And my cross is my key to salvation.
Yeah.
I can't give up this cross.
Yeah. What if it's your cross for 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years? Then what? Who are you?
Yeah.
Right. And that's big. And maybe the last thing I'll say here too is that just this reminder that the sacraments are tangible gifts of God's grace to enter into that suffering, to take our suffering to the sacraments. Like, God has given us this physical encounter. Again, like you're saying, the power of connection in crisis, like the power of like talking to a priest in confession and hearing him say, I absolve you, like the Eucharist, like receiving the body and blood of Christ, like in physical form, right? And so taking our suffering to those sacraments is really, really powerful and is God's plan for our suffering for salvation. So that's a huge way just to unite our wounds is, am I going to the sacraments? Right. But, okay. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to stop there. And thank you guys. This is cool and great new setup. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for coming over
for
and
hosting.
Yeah.
Thanks for the office.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, if you're watching this and you have any comments, if you have any questions for us, please leave them below in the comment section. Hit that like and subscribe button, and feel free to share this with anybody who you think might benefit. And then we'll put just ways to get in contact with each of us in the bio and description. And yeah, I think that's all the general announcements there. You can check out more information about what we're offering as therapists at thecatholictherapycenter.com. And we have other podcasts, blogs, and resources as well. But thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time. God bless.